This presentation, as you can see, establishing a communication strategy for your church. It's similar to one that I did last year, and it was so well received that we took this and put it into a 14-week course that's completely free. We did that last summer. I'll give you details on how you can access that online. This will be the overview of that. And so I'll go quickly because there's a lot to cover. Stop me as I go if you have questions. I may hold some of those questions to the end if they're too detailed specific. But I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on how to go about doing this. So my name is Peter Frank. I'm Senior Marketing Manager. In fact, I need to start my recording. I apologize. There we go. Once again, my name is Peter Frank, Senior Marketing Manager at Concordia Publishing House.
Did you tell everybody to register so they can get these slides?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, if you haven't signed in yet, and you can sign in anytime, I'll email you these slides afterwards and also provide you with the links to the course too. So thank you for that reminder. One year I did a bunch of digital forms for people to fill out and found that good old paper and pen was much easier for everybody. So that's what I'm doing this year. So I've been with the Concordia Publishing House for a little over 10 years now. I started out in the retail side of things running our bookstores. We had bookstores across the U.S. And then once we moved on from that, I moved into our marketing department. My background is actually pre-seminary studies. So I didn't have any kind of marketing training in school, and as I was moving forward and learning marketing, I had to kind of start from scratch and realized how many of these practical principles apply in the church. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how to take some of these common communication strategies that are used in marketing, and I'd say traditional marketing, but more business-focused marketing, and apply them to develop a complete communication strategy. Let me tell a story that'll help emphasize our overall theme of what we're talking about today. So I'm a marketing guy and I love software. I got a phone call one day from a gentleman who was calling me out of the blue as a cold call, and he was explaining his software solution that he had for me. And I won't name it because I don't want to criticize them publicly, but he talked about the value of it, and he said, you know, what this helps you do is improve your SEO, your search engine optimization on your website. And I was like, oh, I understand a lot about SEO. He said, this will help draw people in so that your customers are coming to you and asking you about your products. And I'm like, okay, I understand that. And I said, just curious, how did you find out about me? Because I've never heard about you before. And he's like, well, you're part of a list that we have, that we work with another company that provides us with this. And I said, so you're trying to sell me on a product to draw people in so that you don't have to do outbound calls and you're calling me on a cold calls process. And what it was is that it was the right message. I like that kind of software. I'm the right person for that. It's the total wrong way of going about it. And so even though I was his right message to the right audience, it wasn't in the right way. And so we're going to talk about how that applies in the church communications realm of getting the right message to the right audience at the right way. And I think many times in church communications, we do a couple of those right, but we don't get them all right. And so that's the goal for today, is to get all three of those right. So the outline, we're covering a lot. Like I mentioned at the start, this is part of a large course. This will be the overview of the course. So we'll touch on a number of different things, and then I'll provide you guys with the opportunity to dig in deeper afterwards. We're first going to start off talking about goals, communication goals, and how they tie in with church goals. We're going to talk about personas and how you build out this fictional representation of your audience to help you really target the message. We're going to go through the journey map of how you are communicating with your audience. And I'll say audience quite a bit. Oftentimes, I've had a few people question audience. No, they're the congregation. Well, it's your communications audience. So please know that's what I mean. It's your congregation members. But go through your audience's journey. There's movement associated with it. We'll talk about how to get the right messaging for your audience. And then as we get into much more practical work, we'll talk about the different channels that you can use to communicate your message. I'll present a framework for communication, and those will tie in together to create campaigns. And so it'll really structure your communication efforts, and again, in a very practical, tangible way. So this is our overall goal for today, but first we're starting actually talking about goals. So how can we focus our communication? Let me ask you a question. How many at your church have specific goals for your ministry? Not communication, but goals for your ministry. All right, we got about half the room, maybe a little over half. That's really good. That's a great starting point. So goals, as we talk about them, are specific desirable results that have not yet been achieved. And we go with Think Smart. We use this at CPH quite a bit. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. And a goal is not a goal if it doesn't have these things in there, if there's not an actual end result you're going for. So sometimes I've heard of goals of, well, we are going to preach the word faithfully. Well, that's a good goal, but that's really more of a process. A process is something that should be the standard operating procedure. So there's many things that we do in the church that are certainly good obtainable goals, but they're not SMART goals. They're not actually end results. They're best practices. That's why we're here. They're processes. So as we talk about goals, there's two types of goals that we're looking at. The first one is church goals. Church goals would be very specific new ministries. They flow from the Great Commission. So that is really why we're here. So I've got a few up there. Introduce new ministries, reach specific audiences. So if you are trying to reach, maybe you have an immigrant population in your community. We have a lot from Bosnia within the Afton community. If that was our goal, to grow our ministry for the Bosnian community, that would be a really good specific ministry goal. And then also changing member habits. One thing we've talked a lot about is how do we get more people to come to Bible study. That is a good ministry goal once you start adding those other specific things to it. We want to increase our attendance at Bible study to 10% of our weekly attendance. Something like that would be a specific ministry goal. Now, on the other hand, communication goals are different. It's establishing new processes, improving old processes, or implementing new channels. So if we want to post more regularly on Facebook, or try out an Instagram account, or convert our newsletter into a digital magazine, something like that would be a good communication goal. Now, most of the time, as we talk about goals, we're really going to be referring back to the church goals as part of our communication strategy, because that's ultimately what we are trying to communicate, things that help lead us to those goals. So I want to clarify that, but everything does start with goals. Now, it could be difficult to start planning this out if your church doesn't have goals. And that's why I asked at the beginning how many of you don't have, or how many have goals, to see how many don't have it. Because if you are just in charge of church communications and you don't have goals, you probably don't have the authority to set goals. But you could infer goals based on the actions that your church is taking. That way, you don't have to hold up everything until that's been decided. All right, personas. How can we get to know our church members? Personas is very much an old marketing thing where you kind of determine your target audience. This is not a new thing. If you watched Mad Men, you would see them talking about this. They may use different phrases. Persona is kind of the way to talk about it today, but it's your target audience. So they are... There you go. They are the recipients of the goal results, and this is why goals are so important. At your congregation, I'm sure you could develop many different personas of who is sitting in your church, from the teenagers to the shut-ins and everything in between, even down to the kids. You could probably determine a number of different personas. Very large number. But instead, as we talk about communications, we need to focus on our church goals and what those end results are. And so that's why we talk about the recipients of those end goals. They are a fictional representation of that audience. It's very easy to pick one member of your congregation and say, we're going to build them, our persona around them. That's kind of our target audience. I think we all have those in mind. And then I'll show a couple examples in a minute, and you'll probably be able to pick somebody from your congregation that fits that. I caution you not to get too specific around that. It's good to pull from stories that your members have told, but you don't want it to seem like you're targeting one individual person in your congregation. Again, your personas shape how you communicate. They may even change your tactics. And so as we go farther down the line and get into the really practical things that you're going to do, the actual tactics that you do, it'll be based on your personas. So if your target persona is in a demographic that doesn't use Snapchat, then you probably don't need to implement Snapchat as one of your communication goals. But that's why you start out at the church goals too, or church goals first. So persona determination. In general, every person in your congregation should be able to easily fit into or be assigned to a persona. So it should be all-encompassing that you can divide it up. And that you do want to keep it manageable. You don't want to have 20 personas because we're going to start segmenting the message by persona. But they also should be specific enough that they should describe how to communicate with an individual member. You want to be able to wrap your mind around a person in here. And of course, again, it's a fictional person. So does that kind of dichotomy make sense, where it should be, your personas should be broad enough to encompass all your members, but specific enough that they can be seen as individual? Getting head nods, so good. All right, persona profiles. Developing persona profiles is telling that story of the persona. So we've got here Millennial Melody, 40-ish Fred, and older adult Alice. Now this is a very simple persona profile, and we've got a template that'll help you get into a little bit more detail. Now there's no one right way to develop a persona profile. It really is going to match what you need at your church. But what you want to do is tell this fictional story. And so, for example, Millennial Melody, she's a single 25-year-old who is actively involved in youth group as a teen and trying to regain a connection to the church as an adult. You can probably think of some of those people in your congregation that would fit in that. It might not be exactly the same. It's important to remember that it's not all women. You might have some men who are under Millennial Melody. But having some kind of description in the name that sets the overarching tone of that persona, and then some specific details. I've also put in here which social media channels they use most often. That's one of the many things that you could put in there. If you've ever watched any of the videos that I do from my office, you'll see a bunch of little cards, 8.5 by 11 cards behind me. Those are our persona profiles within our group, and they're a full page with a full story on there. It really helps me understand who I'm communicating with, and I point to them and bring them to meetings often just to say, okay, this is who we're talking about, or at least bring them up to meetings. I don't usually remove the cards. But so there's a few different examples of how you could do it, and you can see from a tactic level, you would not reach out to older adult Alice on Instagram because she's not actively using that. In the same way, if you're going after 40-ish Fred, it might be important for you to be active on LinkedIn. So that's how it ends up affecting your actual tactics. The next thing we're going to talk about is journey maps. How can we get the members moving? And this is where you really start to, the rubber hits the road, so to speak, in terms of where you start laying out the groundwork for your practical actions. So a journey map has actions, and then it has stages. So an action is a specific activity taken by the individual and not the church. And this definition really helps you hone in on what your individual kind of sub-goals are for that person along the line. And I'll give an example in a second. But it's important to make sure that it's actions taken by the individual, because that limits what you can put on your journey map. If you don't know these things are taking place, then you shouldn't be trying to track them. This makes it about outward actions, and knowing that faith is inward. Our goals are not to grow faith in people. The Holy Spirit does that. Our goals are here and physical, tangible things, actions that the person can take, and that's why we track it that way. So you'll see in just a second why that's so important that it's by the individual. The stage is in between those, and that allows you to segment these audiences in between those different stages. So here's the example. We've got a line there with the dots. There are the actions that are taken. So first off, we may map this to mean attending a fellowship event, attending worship for the first time, attending Bible study, starting new member class, becoming a confirmed member, attending worship regularly. You'd set a definition for what regularly means. And finally, attending Bible study regularly. This is an example. For your church, that may be different, certainly based on your goals. But these are things that your audience would do that you could track. You can't track what's going on in their faith life specifically, but their outward actions you can. And then the stages, yeah, so there's those actions as people move along. They go down there, and people may start at different stages, and your goals may end at different stages in there too, if you have multiple goals. And at multiple actions. The stages are in between that, and so it's important to name those stages. We've got here prospect, visitor, potential member, pre-member, new member, engaged member. The reason you do this is that your messages will be different for each one. That's where we're headed next. But when you think about how you would personally interact with somebody who is a prospect and what things you might invite them to, or encourage them to do compared to an already engaged member. You're not going to talk to somebody right off the street and say, I really love for you to attend Bible study regularly. You know, they're not committed to the congregation yet. They're not sure that's where they are. And I think so often we jump the gun. This is allowing you to look at those baby steps along the way. And again, it's trackable actions. So I'll stop here. I didn't stop with the other sections, but I know that this section can become a little bit overwhelming at first to start thinking about how you would put this into place in your congregation. Are there any questions at this time?
I'm just trying to figure out how you would track. Are you trying to actually match names and people to all that?
Yep. So it depends on which actions you are, and that's why it's important to have them be trackable. If you can't track it, then it shouldn't be part of your plan here. You should plan it. And yours may not be 7 steps like we've got here. It may be 3 or 4. But when you think about how you track attendance at worship, if you are right now just doing a head count, maybe it's better to do individual attendance so you can understand who is coming regularly. If you aren't taking attendance at Bible study, that might be a good way of doing that. You know, other things that may occur, you know, if your goal is related to outreach, it might just be signing up for VBS, and so that's an easy one to track. That's why I always hesitate a little bit to show this, because these are examples that I think everybody can relate with, but they hit a broader goal than maybe is appropriate. Does that help a little bit? Okay, very good. Yes?
It just, that feels like you almost need a database if you're going to do this.
Yep, and I definitely would encourage that. Now, that is something we sell. That's not what I'm doing here, and that's, yeah. But the key is, I mean, the reason we sell church database software is because the more you know about your members, the more that you can provide care, pastoral care, any kind of ministry. If you don't have that as a tool in your toolbox, it's a lot harder to provide that specific care that you need.
I wanted to go back.
Yeah.
Show the screen where you showed the different people, Millennial and Fred,
Mhm.
Alice, and stuff like that. I guess I was expecting that we would go more on those strategies with each of those individuals.
We will.
Coming.
That's coming. Yep, don't worry. Yeah, we're actually going to plot them on this map and talk about how that's different there. So yeah, good. I'm glad you're following that line of thinking, so you're on the right direction. Yes?
And then you could, if I understand this correctly, you could continue this so after they're an engaged member, you can keep track of what they're actually doing,
Oh, absolutely.
right?
Yep.
So depending on what individual map you want to do for your congregation.
You got it. It's going to be based on your goals. And so maybe your goal is to have a community life group after that. You know, maybe being part of an active member of that or leading that. That might be another goal that you set forward. And the goal is to gain a certain number of leaders. So yes, this is very much based, again, on those goals that you have as a congregation. And the other thing is you might have different maps for different goals. They might not all fit on that same map. And so your outreach might revolve around your preschool, and that's one goal, and your inreach might revolve around just the church, and so you're going to have very different maps with that. Yes?
Have a different map, say for, like, this would be for or a different communication strategy for existing members?
Very possibly, yep. And I laid it out here so that it's one and the same, because in the long run you would want your outreach, the people that you bring in through outreach, to become engaged members. But if your goals are not directly in line, sure, you could have those different ones. And that's going to really affect, again, going back to the communications, what messages you're communicating and how. So let's move forward, because I think that'll help clear some of these questions up. The next thing is our message, and how can we focus our messages. So there's two things I'm going to show here, a message map and a content map. Message maps show the connections between the ministry goals and the individual messages, whereas a content map provides the personal content at the individual steps of the journey map. So the content map, or sorry, message map, I'm sure you've seen this before. It's a very common thing in public relations, but it also is helpful for creative thinking and outlining papers and things like that. I know that even they use this in elementary schools, where you start with the main point. You start with your mission statement, and from there your ministry goals come in there. And if you don't have a mission statement at your church, that may just be the Great Commission right there. That's where the ministry goals, again, flow from the Great Commission and what we are called to do here at this time in this place. So you would have your goals from here, and I put 4 up there. You might have 2, you might have 6, depends on your congregation. But then from there you have those individual messages. And these become the priority. If these are the goals of your congregation, achieving those goals and explaining how to achieve those in those messages is going to be the most important thing. The content map, on the other side, actually has your journey map on here, and this is where you would put in your personas there. You would put those on the other axis, and then your messages go in here. So this is where, I know there's a lot at the screen at once, and it gets a little bit overwhelming. Well, it is complicated, but the principles are actually rather simple. And it goes back to that point of the right message to the right person at the right time. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. So you're going to talk to older adult Alice differently at this stage than you're going to talk to millennial Melody at this stage here. The things that you communicate to those different audiences at those different stages are vastly different. And often in church communications, we take the shotgun approach of saying, send it to everybody. We'll put everything in our newsletter and send it out. We'll put everybody on the email list and send it out. And that's what we're trying to avoid, because that doesn't always get you the right audience or the right message or at the right time in the right way. So as you start to think about this, even if you don't map all of this out, and I'll tell you, finding content for those different stages, that's probably the hardest part of that, because it adds up very quickly. But at least thinking through this, and again, this goes with when you have it all on the same map. If you have different maps, you might have one map with 2 personas here and one map with 2 personas there, and it may change it for you, make it even more complex. But the key principle is understanding that these are different messages, and what you're communicating at those stages are going to become more effective if you understand who you're communicating with, and really why. What are you trying to get them to do, to further them along? And that helps you cut down on the noise that you send out. So you don't need to let older adult Alice know about everything that you're doing to target Fred to become a confirmed member. You don't need to let everybody know about your new member classes, because that's just one more thing that they don't, that adds to the noise that they don't need to hear. So does that kind of make sense? Does that help pull a few of these things together? Because this is the key part before we go into the practical, I think we're going to channels next, but yes?
There is congregational pushback on this, because some congregations have the culture that everybody should know everything.
I know.
Older adult Dallas says, well, I didn't know the youth group was going the same way.
Yep.
Dallas, you weren't going.
That is an excellent point.
So you get there is a
Yep.
pushback on that from the members.
Well, and I think that's where things like your church website really come into play. And I know maybe for older adult Alice, going to the church website is not the ideal. But maybe your newsletter does have everything, but you don't send it out in the same way to everybody. Maybe you make that available for everybody, but you call out different things to the different audiences. And so you might be emailing the newsletter to one set, and then you might be distributing it to another. You don't have to mail your newsletter using postage for everybody if that's not the best way to communicate with them. So I think you can have the both and of making the messages available for everybody, for those who want to stay in the loop. But in reality, that's not necessary. It's not worth your time and effort to make sure that everybody is hearing everything if it's not effective. And that's really what we're going for. That's why the ministry goals are so important to have first, because that's what we're working towards. And so if it doesn't support those ministry goals, don't put all that time and effort in just for the sake of getting the message out to everyone. So thank you very much for bringing that up. That's been brought up before because there are many people who just want to stay in the know. So, and there's something to be said for that too. If older adult Alice doesn't know that there's even a youth ministry going on, then she might not be sending her grandkids there. So there's value in that. Good. What other questions before I move on? Is this completely overwhelming? I know you said there's a lot.
No, but it makes sense. Like, big message, takeaways, a blast email might be very efficient, but it's not effective.
Exactly. Yep.
Not as effective.
It's not as effective. I'll tell you as a marketer, this is a key thing for me. There's nothing I like more than somebody telling me, keep me on your emails, but please take me off this list. Like, I don't need to get these emails. Or please send these to so-and-sos. They handle that responsibility. The more I can cull that list down to just the right audience, the better it is for me, because I'm not wasting anybody's time or attention. And our attention is taken up a lot. We don't need anything more taking our attention. All right, well, moving on, the next step is channels, and where is the right place to share our message. And I go through that whole process before that because it's really easy to just jump to here and just to say, we need to be doing X. And there's a lot of X that we could be doing. So I'm going to focus on 6 key areas here. Your church website, that's still a very important part. We'll talk about that first. A blog. How many of you have blogs at your church? Good, a good number, excellent. That is something I think is severely underutilized in the church. It's a very popular way of communicating, and we do this all the time in the church anyways, between sermons and devotions and even Bible studies, but we don't always put it in a place that's available for everybody to see. So blogs, emails. Email is, I know, very common within church communication and is still very effective. It may get a bad rap because so many people, so many marketers abuse it, but it's a very effective way of communicating. Social media, of course, is the new pretty. It's not even that new anymore, but it's very much the topic of discussion for most of communications. Search, and this may seem like an odd channel. We'll talk about why search is important, and I could go into a lot more detail on this, but it's in relation to your website, but it's a little bit different than that. And then finally, paid advertising, and oftentimes church workers will balk at that. Well, we don't have the budget for paid advertising. And you don't need a large budget, but I often point back to the yellow pages. How many of your churches are in the yellow pages, and how much do you pay for that? I know I'm hearing more and more churches that are dropping out of that, which I personally think is a good thing. But we've paid for advertising in that way for years, and there's much more effective and less expensive ways of advertising now. So that's what we're going to get into. So first off, your church website. It's the home base of all your online communication. And this will flow into the topic that we're headed into, but it's very important. And the reason for that is it's the only channel where you can control the environment. All other channels are being controlled elsewhere, even social media. I'm leading a session on Facebook tomorrow, and we're going to talk about what happens when Facebook changes things. They control that channel. You don't get to decide who gets to see your messages unless you're willing to pay, and then at that point it becomes paid advertising. So of course it must be optimized for mobile, and we can talk a lot about things for with specifics of website, but I call this out because it's really easy to think of the website as the browser, and we kind of laugh about it that sometimes on the support side and at CTS, the internet is the blue E. Like, that's what people think of as the internet. But anymore, the internet is the phone in your pocket. That's how people are coming to your website. And so understanding that's where your website is now is key. And that helps cut down on the work, honestly, because there's so much less real estate. It gets down to the real messages. And the cleaner, more effective websites, or cleaner and more efficient websites are the more effective websites because they're just focused on the messages. But of course, you must contain timely, relevant content, again, that focuses on the goals of the viewers. And while your website could be the hub of all your communication, understanding your personas and who's actually going to your website is going to be the key. All right, the next one is blogs. We had a number of people who have blogs at church. Yes?
Sorry, going back to the
Sure.
Do you have a specific tool to help analyze the target of people that are going to your website?
You know, Google Analytics is really the best way, and it's not perfect, but they have the best capabilities for you in terms of understanding your audience at the right price, because it's completely free. And it's not perfect when you get into demographics, but at least it tells you about what content is most relevant, and that combined with their demographic tools helps with that. I think their demographics are getting better the more an audience is being built up on Google, but it's still not perfect. But that's definitely the number one go-to tool for analytics. So, yes?
You mean, we have a church website, which we do.
Mm-hmm.
But how can Google help me find out who's looking at it?
So Google Analytics is a free tool that Google provides that allows you to put a tracking code on your website so that it sends signals back to Google, and they put it in a reportable, a report engine for you, essentially. So you can see what your traffic levels are like, what pages are getting the most views, how much time people are spending on pages, where they're coming from. They have an audience tool in there that, using their demographic data that they know about people on the internet, they provide you summaries of what your audience is like. Go to google.com/analytics, and yeah, you sign up there. They'll give you the code that you put it on your page. It needs to be on every page of your website, but most websites allow you to put it in one place and it distributes it across it. So yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. We have a church website builder, and we intentionally did not put reports in there because it wasn't worth the time to develop it when Google provides this all for free. So we made it really easy for you to add Google Analytics to it and let them do the heavy lifting on the report side. So good questions. Thank you very much. All right, so blogs, and blogs are collections of practical shareable content to achieve ministry goals. And this is where I think that blogs are not utilized well on the church side of things. Often we provide the activities, we provide the opportunities for involvement, but the teaching opportunities that lead to that next stage on the journey map, the church has the tools and the resources, the people who can provide that. You would share that in conversations. A blog allows you to share that to a larger audience. A blog can also be used in a variety of other ways. It's syndicated content, so it's content that comes out on a regular basis. Blogs always have the latest at the top, and so it can be used also for announcements. But I'd caution you to use it in a variety of ways and segment it in that way. So if you're going to have a blog just for announcements, keep that separate from your content. But if your target audience is the preschool families, putting out content for preschool parents is going to not only provide helpful advice to them, but draw in an audience, and that's key. And in the marketing world, we call that content marketing. You see, we do that all the time at CTS, and we'll talk about our blog later on. We provide helpful content about technology in the ministry. It's not to make you buy our software, it's to build up trust and to build up those relationships. And at the church, that's key. So there's been a number of good ones. As a preschool parent, how to get your preschooler to eat dinner. Things like that are, they're not real weighty content, but they're helpful. And again, it builds up trust. Yes?
We call it curated content.
Curated content is a good way of doing that. That's pulling content in from other sources and providing it. And social media is a good way of doing that, although you have to have a dedicated following on social. That stuff is getting dinged by the algorithms now, but it's a great way to, again, build up trust and have you be that kind of expert there. Good. Oh, yes?
Doesn't that then build up your SEO?
Absolutely.
Aren't you more relevant then?
Yes, some of the rich things that that have rich SEO value are things like visits and time on site and sharing, so links pointing to that. All of that blogs are great for. And again, that goes to the more content-based ones, the helpful advice as opposed to the announcements. So good. They can be tailored for specific audiences or specific goals, like we were talking about with the preschool example. They provide useful support for all other channels, not only SEO, but also social media. It's something that you can share on there that's not just another event that's coming up. It's something that you can email about that is a different kind of email. It's not, where do I sign up? It's, here, take a look at this, read this post, and let me know what you think. It's a very, it doesn't require much of an effort or any kind of time spent on the other, that's not the word I'm looking for, but it's really a low weight thing for people to do. And it must be timely and time consuming, or it must be timely and it will be time consuming. So it must be timely in order to draw an audience, and just know that it will be time consuming. It's not something that you can just throw together in a few minutes, but the time is well spent. Yes?
Separate and from the website, from a website?
It should be part of your website, but it's kind of a different strategy, and that's why I keep it separate. It may be a completely different tool than your website, but it should be linked on your website. So there's a variety of different ways you can do that. Many web platforms like WordPress allow you to do that right there. But you know, if you want to be really adventuresome and have a Medium account, that might be a separate site that you would link to. So yes?
Your blog should also be not a full church focused, but just like children's ministry.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
So you could have multiple blogs
Yep.
with one church website.
You got it.
Okay.
Yep, that really helps you focus on your audience, again, providing them with the most relevant messaging. Good. Was there another hand? Yes.
In your experience, is there a certain persona that is a blog user?
You know, it's kind of grown over the years. More and more people read blogs now because they're more prevalent. I would say that it's probably that middle group, not the real young side of things. They're much more on social media. And the older end of the spectrum is not as active, although that's changing. That's the area that's it's really grown into more. But probably your 25 to 55, it's a large range, is in my experience who is more commonly in that. The other thing that goes into this, and it's very similar to a blog, is podcasts. That hits that same kind of audience, especially commuters. And it's really the same kind of goals. You're providing helpful content, it's syndicated, you post it regularly. It's just in a different format. So in fact, now that I think about it, I probably should add that in here because that's cool. And that one requires a certain level, a different level of commitment and time than just blogs, also equipment. But it's that same kind of thing. So think of it as in longer format content that's more than social media posts. Good. All right, the next one is email. Still one of the most effective tools of communication. And like I said before, email gets a bad rap because marketers abuse it. And I'm sorry for that. On behalf of marketers, I apologize for how many emails you get. But it still proves far and away to be more effective than any other means of communication today. And I think a big part of that, and I think I have that up here, it's preferred due to its non-immediate nature. You send me an email, I can respond when I want to. You send me a text message, I still have some time to respond, but there's a little bit more of an immediate thing. If you post on social media, that comes across as a text message, but an email is in my court. I can decide when I do that. I can shut my email off for hours at a time to get things done. And so that's why it becomes more effective. Now, the approach that I like to take is to make it very personal. The church doesn't send emails. Salem Lutheran Church is not capable of sending emails, but Susie at Salem Lutheran Church can. So the more personal you can make it, the better, because really it is people that are sending these. And so you'll see the emails that come from us is always coming from one of the members of our team, unless it's an automated email. But really, almost all the stuff we have comes from people, because that's who's writing it. Best when personal and optimized for mobile viewing. Keep that in mind. Graphic-based emails are awesome, but they're not always awesome on mobile devices. And so as you focus on the real communication, you don't have to put in tons of stuff. It really depends on your audience too. And that's the great thing with many of the email tools that are out there. You can see who's viewing on mobile, who's viewing on desktop, what types of emails are being consumed where. You can kind of make those calls. And then the key thing with emails is that they should always lead to that next step. There should always be some kind of call to action to that. And if it's an email about a blog post, the call to action might just be to read the blog post. But to just send emails informing is missing a great opportunity to move people along. So if you're sending about an event, give them a place to register. Always give them that action that they can take. The acronym is CTA. We use that all the time. Usually you see that as a box. It doesn't necessarily have to be a box with words in it, but some kind of next step to that. All right, social media. There's a few, I think I've got 6 main ones up here. There's more and more every day. These are the big players, and I don't think churches should be in every one of these. But it's important to understand what they are, who uses them, and how you could use as a church. Now, I do think every church should be on Facebook, and the reason is in the billions, because there's so many people on it. And one of the things I'll talk about tomorrow that I was surprised in my research, that Facebook has been getting known as being the old person's tool, or old person's social media, old being like 30. But the numbers do show that there's still a large segment of the population in that 18 to 30 range that are using it. Now below that, I think there's rules about tracking usage for under 18. The 13 to 18-year-olds are not on Facebook as much. But that's not usually your target audience in church communications. Youth group communications, sure, but not for church-wide communication. So focus on sharing relevant content. There's been a lot of changes with Facebook in terms of how they display things in the news feed. We'll talk about that some tomorrow if you're able to come. There's plenty of things online. We did a live video with Seth Hinge from the Michigan District a few weeks back talking about their algorithm changes. And they're focusing much more on content that sparks conversations. It used to be about likes and shares, and then it was just about comments. Now it's about replies to comments and things that cause interaction within the post. So it's important to learn as much about Facebook as you can because of that, because they're always changing. Now, Instagram is the one that is growing the quickest. They're also owned by Facebook, so that is their solution to that younger audience. They jumped on that right away, and at the time they bought Instagram, people thought they spent way too much money on it, and it was a steal. They're using that very well. That is a very different kind of experience and what kind of things you post. I struggle to get used to Instagram in my personal life. I grew up with Facebook. I was an early adopter of Facebook. Instagram is very different. It's all about images. It's all about those moments in life, and I struggle with it, but lots of people are really good at it. And we've got people on our team who that's their primary one, so I rely on them for a lot of that. But that is a great thing to learn. It's only going to continue to grow. But it's not a place that you're going to go and post all of your church events on, but it may be something you post pictures of the church events after the fact. Twitter, this is one of the ones I updated since last summer because I used to say they were really struggling to find their identity. They're actually rebounding a little bit, and I think some of that has to do with a certain president that uses it all the time. But it's a very different kind of platform. It's news-driven, and I don't think there's that much value in it for churches, depending on who your target audiences are. Now, it's the statistics will show men use it far more than women, and so if you are targeting that audience, take a look at, you could even ask your members, are they using Twitter? But it's one of those things where it's, I don't think, because of all the distractions, because of the nature, it's so timely and immediate, and that's not really what is going on in most churches. It's not about things right this moment. So that's something I would caution on. I think if there's anything to drop, out of those three specifically, certainly Twitter would be the one. LinkedIn, I don't think the church needs to be on LinkedIn, but I think you need to be on LinkedIn as church workers. And especially at events like this, it's a fantastic way to build connections. What it also does is if you're relying on LinkedIn rather than Facebook, it also keeps your Facebook newsfeed clean and allows you to use it better for actual personal interactions. LinkedIn allows you to provide those connections. If you're going to be looking like, oh, I remember meeting somebody, let me go find out who they are. That's what LinkedIn is great at. But I don't think the church needs to have a presence on there. Pinterest, like Pinterest. I don't use it like most people use it. I look up things like spreadsheets and user interface. My pins are rather dorky compared to all the beautiful food pictures and recipes and stuff that most people have on there. It's a fun one to gain ideas. Digital scrapbooking with kind of a minimal social element. I don't think that churches need to be on Pinterest. I think your VBS craft people should be, absolutely, and they probably already are. That kind of personality can really get engaged with Pinterest. It's focusing on creativity, and so if there's ministries in your church that are targeting that audience, or if it's one of your goals to have something more along the creative lines, and I'm struggling to even come up with what those might be at a church level. Yeah.
Some ideas, the way that it's not us using it, but it's schools. So if you have a school,
Yeah, there you go.
they put tutoring help.
That's interesting.
And
I like that.
Things like that. If you're doing with Sunday schools, I go all the time to look up for my kids' activities to do in my classrooms.
That makes a lot of
within the
sense.
ministries at church. So that would be one way.
I
If you're
think so.
talking about parents helps, it might be a way to pin those blogs.
Yeah.
That it's a parent resource. Here's one on bullying. Here's one on. So that would be a way to.
I like that idea.
In the church.
That's very good. Thank you for sharing that. No, that's excellent. No, and like I said, I use Pinterest in a rather different way than most people do. But for that audience, that makes a lot of sense. Good.
Yeah, because pretty much everything is a pin now. So.
Well, right, yeah, because it's not just photos. You
It's
can.
not just scrapbooking. It's not just crafts.
Right.
It's all sorts of things.
Yeah, and I put digital scrapbooking as pinning being the scrapbooking of it, sharing the ideas, not just meant for scrapbooking. But yeah, that collection of ideas. Good.
So we collected ideas for our families to use with their children to prepare for Lent.
That's nice. I like that one too.
They look at that. There's a lot.
That's good. Well, and that is the audience for that, is especially moms. Probably not so much dads, unless you put a spreadsheet Lent thing in there, but you're right.
For dads, how to do their daughter's hair. A bundle of little videos or tools of the trade, and we sent that to all the dads.
That-
Sometimes they have to do the hair.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna need more nimble fingers before I get my 2-year-old's hair, but good. Excellent. And then Snapchat is the last one on there. And rising social network, popular among youth, focusing on stories. They were the ones that created stories. Facebook and Instagram stole from them, but everybody stole the newsfeed from Facebook, so it all works out in the end. But Snapchat is another one. I struggle with Instagram. I really struggle with Snapchat. But I know people who are doing great things. In fact, my buddy Don and I are going to be talking in a few weeks. He is a youth pastor in the Chicago area, and he uses Snapchat in his youth ministry, not so much as broad communication, but one-on-one communication with people, because that's where his youth are. And so I'm really excited to hear what he has to say about that, because there's some very practical elements in there. At a church-wide level, at the church office level, I don't think you need to worry about that right now, unless that is your primary audience. But certainly if you have a youth leader, they need to be on there. And so that's the difference between understanding these personally and using them as part of your church communications. Yes?
So recently, I was talking to a number of DCPs that were debating about Snapchat or not, and a lot of the lean is to not, because it does delete the content immediately, so you're not protected. on that?
That's a good point. And that's where I think from a personal level, if you're using it to communicate, I mean, certainly anytime you communicate with youth, you have to be careful with it. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good thought on that, let's put it that way. It's something to be aware of. But I think at least knowing that that's where they're there, being careful within youth ministry is going to be important no matter what tool you use, and especially individual in-person conversations. And so I think there may be some risk to that, but if the upside is to be able to connect a youth with the gospel in some way, that's where the pros come in and probably outweigh the negatives. But yeah, it's something you have to be careful with, although anything within youth ministry you have to be so careful with.
Screenshot the messages though, then.
You could, yeah, absolutely. I'm sure. I actually didn't know that. That's interesting. It makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just within youth ministry, if there's anything questionable, like you can't leave it just there, and that's where I think at least having that conversation with the youth, you're there. Whereas if you're not there, they may be going to somebody else, and not having that positive influence. But yeah, Snapchat is the one that is the farthest stretch for me because I don't get it. I've had a few of my coworkers try to explain it to me before, and we have a couple blog posts by Hannah Osborne, who is my summer intern, and we hired her because she gets that and she understands how to use it, and that's awesome. She's on our team and she uses it in a great way, but that's where I get a little uncomfortable. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you, but
Anybody in here explain it to us? Snapchat and how it works? I don't know how it works.
They like it the fact that it doesn't stay on your phone, so it doesn't take up your memory on your phone. And so that's the nice thing about it. You can choose if you want to save the picture or not. I know that the big thing right now is the stories, and that they cannot let their story lapse. And so there's a DCE over in California that they took them on a houseboat trip, and they purposely parked in a cove to ruin their Snapchat stories so that they would get off of Snapchat because they have to post so often, and so that's why you will see them on it all the time. They do become slaves to it.
yeah, interesting.
Streaks.
Yes, because you have to have your streaks and you don't want to break your streak.
Wow.
The positive thing that they like about it is that it's quick.
Yeah.
You know, Instagram, you're scrolling and scrolling. They like Instagram too. That's the other one to reach youth. But they're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. Where Snapchat, they can watch it and it's done and they don't have to worry about it.
Right.
And generally, if your parent can't see the texting, if you've
Well.
got an app where you're checking your kid's phone, on Snapchat you can't see it.
Right. Yep.
Snapchat can just send to individual people or groups of friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you can't private.
And I think that's where Facebook and Instagram stories are as well, and that's where tying in with Facebook Messenger,
But
the
I
stories.
mostly see it used with the stories.
Okay.
I mostly see it.
That's good to know. Thank you. That's the part where even on Facebook, like every once in a while I'll post a story. Like I posted something from the plane today, but it was a Facebook story. Good. Another question.
All of the social media.
Yes.
Is there any kind of liability, like Facebook, when we post pictures of church events?
Yes.
Kids' pictures, or anybody's pictures? Should there
Absolutely.
be some kind of a waiver from?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Again, a waiver. Certainly for the kids, it's good for everybody. Posting group shots where people are not identifiable is okay. But like at our school, we make it a standard practice that everybody fills a waiver at the beginning, and if the ones that don't, we know about it, and we don't share photos of them. And that's just, that's kind of the standard practice.
When you publish on Facebook that photo, it's public domain.
Right, exactly.
And I think the biggest thing with the waivers is parents just don't want their kids' names.
That's, well, and...
And so, and that's often what I find. I don't mind if people post pictures of my kids, but don't put their names
Right.
on it. And that's what I find within the parenting community. They're being really cautious. Now, there are some parents who don't, and then they tell you, please don't.
But I think that's kind of, hopefully that's common sense, that you're not posting kids' names on your church website, or like...
You'd be surprised
I know.
Okay.
I found one church website where not only it had the confirmation kids, and not only did it have their full names, it had their birthdays on there.
Yes.
And not quite. I'm sure if I dug a little more, I would have found that. Those are things that I would hope would be common sense that you wouldn't do that, but they're not. You're right. Yeah. Yep. That's a good point.
That, like even your elders' names, I was like, or you've got your whole entire church council names and things like that, which, you know, it can be good to have the communication aspect, but have you asked those people if you can
Right.
post their names and their phone numbers, emails,
And
all on your website?
And you may not think that it's on your website unless you're posting a PDF of your newsletter, which you often include all of that. So, yeah, you have to be really careful with those things. But yes, again, it should be common sense. It's not. And so to be careful. But yeah, waivers, absolutely. Good. All right. Moving on, the next one is search. And again, like I said before, it points back to your website. It keeps the focus on your most important channel, your most engaged audience, and is essentially free. And I say it's your most engaged audience because if people are searching for you on search, they want to know what you're talking about. Unlike the other channel, unlike social media, where you're trying to get into their feed, get their attention, these people are seeking you out. And so that's why it's so important. So if people are searching for churches in your area, you want to have a strong presence. That's a key audience. Search engine optimization is frequently changing. Just like Facebook and their algorithms, Google's algorithm has been changing for years. And they are all about the intent of the user. So it's not a bad thing for you. They're not trying to downplay your website. They're trying to get your website to the people who want your website. So it's important to understand that.
Give a quick definition of what.
Sure. I'm sorry, I sometimes throw these terms out. So search engine optimization is taking steps to improve the search results, where your site shows up on search results. So it's there's a standard criteria of what a website should have. The way it's set up technically, there's 4 factors. There's on-site, off-site, and I know I did a whole presentation on this last year, and but the 4 pillars of SEO, the 2 that you really have to focus on are the on-site and the off-site. On-site is what you control. There's technical factors in there as well, and then I think trust was the other one. But making sure your site is structured so that the content is in an ideal format for the user, making sure that people can share it and link back to it. That's a huge part of SEO, a huge part of Google looking at your site and saying, okay, this is valuable information because other people are referencing it. Traffic is a key thing, and so driving people to your site. So there's a lot that goes into it. I can give you, if you'd like to know more, I can give you the link to the presentation from last year. So, good. And then, yeah, it should lead visitors exactly where they need to go. And the presentation that I have on SEO talks about it not just from what you can do with your site, but what other tools come up within Google. And we'll talk about that some more tomorrow. My, I think, second presentation of the day is why the church website is still important. Search results are not just your website anymore. Things like Google My Business. You know, if people are looking for a location, you can determine what your church's presence look like on Google Maps, and that image search is a key thing. How you name your images so that your church shows up when people are looking at images. There's so many different types of search results now. All right, paid advertising is next. And the great thing about paid advertising, I think I lost my image. Oh no, I know where you're going. Paid advertising has shifted to be based on intent, based on interest or identifying. You can target specific audiences as opposed to things like the Yellow Book, sorry to pick on, or Yellow Pages, but that is a blanket message for everybody. Whereas with advertising now, you can get very targeted. So it's self-managed PPC, which is pay per click. That is one way of doing it. You can also pay per views, but pay per click is you're paying for results. And it's based on budget, so you can say what you want to spend. It's not unlimited. It will limit what it shows based on your budget. It's a bidding system where you're competing against other advertisers, but it allows you to really control it nicely. So if you have a budget of $500 for the year, you can spend just $500. It's not going to blow your budget out of the water. You can control how much you spend. Ideal for drawing in a new yet targeted audience, and there is a steep learning curve and it requires regular monitoring, but it can be very much worth it. So a few that I would recommend looking into: Google AdWords, which is paid search on Google, so the paid results always come up on the top. That has probably the steepest learning curve. There's a lot that goes into it, but again, those are people who are specifically looking for your church. So it's key, it's worth it. Like if you could say, going back to Yellow Pages, I only want to pay for the people who are turning to the churches section, that would be great. That's what Google AdWords is. Facebook ads is detailed targeting, and there are so many ways you can target in that. We'll go into detail on that tomorrow if you'd like to know more. But Instagram ads is part of Facebook ads as well. And so you can target both of those audiences. You place these ads on those different locations. And you can get down to just your followers. You could get to lookalike audiences, so people who look like your followers but are not. You could target, women in their 30s who are parents who recently moved to the area, and show them your preschool. I don't like that. Yes, you can do that on Facebook. You can get so granular in who you are targeting to get, again, the right message to the right audience. So often paid advertising causes people to balk because there's money involved. But when you look at your entire expenses at a church, focus on what's important, and drawing in new audiences, drawing in new people into the church is a key part of that.
It's money well spent.
Yes, you got it. Exactly. So, yeah, we could talk about that a lot more. I'm going to move on to this last part, our framework. Actually, this is the second to last part. Framework. How do we leverage each channel? So this is a tool that I like to share that emphasizes the journey map, and for me, this really helped pull it all together. I learned about this, and not in as many terms, but from Chris Brogan, who's a speaker. It was at a conference, and he mentioned this as part of his keynote speak. It was not his main point, but it was the only thing I could think about after that, and so I looked it up, and he had shared more about it before. It emphasizes the journey map, but it downplays any one channel, and I think that's really key. As we just got through channels, and social caused the most discussion. We have a lot of emphasis on certain channels, but the framework downplays any one of them and builds them all up to give each one a purpose. So lastly, it gives each message direction too, and so that everything is always having that movement on the journey map. So this is the framework. First off, there are outposts. These are where you have your conversations. So social certainly is a conversation thing. Social, it's in the name. It's conversations, it's back and forth. While you can blanket message and go one out, the whole purpose of that is to have communication back and forth. But then also search and paid. And I put those under here because, one, it's farther away from everything else. You're reaching into different audiences, but there's intent on there and there's response. So people are searching for your site. People are in this specific demographic looking for things, and you're targeting them. So that's where the outposts come in. So those are those channels farther away from it. The next one is your media empire. And this is the phrase he uses. It's kind of weird, especially at a church, to think of media empire, but these are your longer format things. So it's your blogs, it's your email. It's more one way than conversation, your outpost, your conversation. It's your message to them, but it's your central location on using these media channels to draw people in even farther. So social can point to your media empire, and your media empire points back to your home base, and that's conversions. That's your website. And conversions not in the altar call conversion kind of thing. We're just talking about conversions, those actions on the journey map, taking those next steps. And again, your website is the place that you can do that. Everything else is drawing them in, but that's the environment that you can control, that you can track those actions, whether it's signing up for an event. A step below that is real life in your day-to-day interactions. Your website is the closest thing to that. Again, that's the environment you control. So as you look at these channels, and I'll show you an example as you get into the campaign, it helps you understand that your purpose of your outposts is to draw people closer to your content. And the purpose of your content is to draw them to your website, your home base, for that conversion. And for me, that really helped me downplay, okay, how do I get people to, in my case, buy products on social? Well, I don't. You know, maybe it's through some paid advertising. In the same way, how do you get people to sign up for an event on Facebook? Well, maybe you don't. Maybe your goal is to just start that conversation, lead to more detailed information sharing on there, and convert them later on. So taking it each stage at a time. Now, that's not to say that this replaces your overall journey map. This almost lays on top of that. It's not that your final stages are on your website. There's a part at each point, but in between, as you're getting to that conversion process, understanding how to leverage each channel in this way, for me, this makes a lot of sense. And we'll play that out in campaigns. So how can we be consistent and efficient in our communication? So campaigns are templated tactics, and they're done so for consistency. It's familiar movement for the audience. It's specific goals for each campaign. And I'll show you what that means in a second. The last one is a unique message by person by stage. So let's pull up our journey map one more time and show all of the stages and the actions. Your campaigns, your communication campaigns, are the things that lead people from one stage to the next. And in some case, it may just be one step. In some, your overarching goal would be moving farther. But this is looking at it so as to not say you're always trying to get those who are attending a fellowship event all the way down to attending Bible study regularly, or whatever the case may be in your congregation. You're taking these in baby steps, focusing on ultimately what is that goal of that messaging. And that makes it a lot easier. That makes it more bite-sized, and you're not looking at the entire picture. You're just looking at that subset of things. And so success in your communications is not based on this, it's based on the end of these. So within each campaign, this is where the framework comes in. You start looking at how, for this communication campaign, based on the persona that I'm targeting, what tactics do I do? So lay it out with Outposts, Media Empire Home Base. You put your social channels in there, your Media Empire things, your blog, your email in there, and your website. So you look at that individual campaign, what that message is for the persona, and choose which ones go in there. I put those all in as an example, just to show where they might fall. But you might just have a campaign where you're putting Facebook post, drawing into a blog post about, for preschoolers, and your conversion is to sign up for an open house. That might be your next step. If attending an open house is that action step on your journey, that may be all you do. So does that kind of make sense? That the framework can be a little hard to understand sometimes and a little hard to explain because it's so conceptual. I hope this makes it a little bit more of a practical and how you might use it. Yes?
Do you recommend sending it then through like an email or a blog through your groups, through your database?
Absolutely. I mean, you're trying to segment your audience. You don't want to send it to everybody. So
So sometimes I just have all my people in my email. And now we have Shelby next, and so we can put them all in groups.
right, exactly.
So
That's why.
using that group.
Absolutely. No matter what church management software you're providing, there's a communications aspect of it. So often it's seen as doing for the financial side, but you have all of your information there. You can segment right in that database for your specific audiences. And so whether you have to, you can do it from there or you pull it out and put it into MailChimp or something like that, but segmenting them is the key for those exact reasons. Good. Is there another hand up?
I was just gonna say, this seems like it's a full-time job.
Well, yes, and I had that.
Churches,
Well,
hire somebody to do this?
yeah, they do. A lot of them do. Yeah, in fact, tomorrow Stacy Yates is presenting, and she was in this session last year, and I could tell she was getting concerned, and she's like, where do you find the time to do all this? And I've had a lot of conversations with her since then of how she's beginning to implement this. And you take baby steps, you do what you can. Ultimately, it comes down to focusing on that primary principle of what can I do to get that right message to the right person in the right way. And these other steps help you get that structure in place, but you can still do that by making different decisions. Going back to email, let's not email our entire list. Let's focus on the people that make this most relevant. And it may be a few extra steps, but it gets you closer to having a better communication strategy. Yeah?
In our church, I don't know if this is a Concordia product, we use Shepherd staff.
Yep, that's ours.
And we have like, exaggerating, 100 different databases. I mean, we really have to work on that.
Mm-hmm.
We also use Constant Contact.
Okay,
a
yep.
lot. And how I segment mine so as not to send to everybody. The different groups that I'm involved in, I have separate lists for names and so
Mhm.
I have my own segregated list and I send to them when I need to. I don't necessarily send to the whole
That's
church.
fantastic.
But what you said was really interesting because usually I send them out from a different church and then I go back to the analytics and see who opens them. But if I send them out with a name on them,
Mhm.
either my name or the pastor's name or somebody, it zooms up. for people to look at.
Absolutely.
That is a good lesson from that.
It is. It's very much. We've seen those same results, and that's why you might get a lot of emails from me personally. But it works, and there's a trust there. But it also, again, computers aren't sending emails. They may actually be doing the distribution of it, but people are behind the emails. So good. Well, in summary, how do you pull it all together and get others on board? Go back to your question. You document your strategy as much as you can. Do what you can right now and make it better. This is always going to be changing. You train your team on what you're trying to do. And if your team is just you, that makes it a little bit easier. That's one of the... Exactly. But if you are in charge of communications on your staff, it may just be as simple as saying, we're changing up our strategy a little bit. We're going to be communicating less to everybody and more specifically to certain audiences. And go that right, just so people understand what you're doing. Stick with it because it's a long process. Ours is still constantly changing. I've been working on this for several years, and we continue to make tweaks and do things differently. And you just adjust it as you learn. As long as your end goal, again, of getting the right message to the right audience in the right way is overriding everything, that'll help you make better decisions and help you get closer and closer to it. And your audience, your congregation is going to appreciate that. It's cutting down the noise that they have so much of today and providing relevant messages. All right, so if you want to learn more, this was all in our Church Online Communications Comprehensive. We call it the Comprehensive as this complete course. It's a free 14-week training session online. Each session includes a training video, a blog post, a free download that goes with it, and these are some of the topics. So we break it down into pretty much everything I covered. The first session is what you just experienced today. From there, setting church communication goals, determining your church audience, understanding your audience, creating movement. I won't read all of these because you can see them there as well. It was just to help to get this idea out, to learn more from people who are attending. We got a lot of great feedback. I think we had over 650 people sign up last summer. You will hear in the videos, we talked about a private Facebook group. We did that during the summer, but it was never planned to keep going. So that's available for viewing. I didn't get as much interaction on that as I had hoped to as well. But this is one of the downloads. This is the download that goes with today's session, is first tracking your church's communication footprint and just making a list of all of your different channels that you have right now. But there's the link, www.concordiatechnology.org/comprehensive. If you signed up back there, I'll send this to you, including the slide deck. Yep, give me your email and I'll make sure that you get all of this. And but you can go and find that all right now. The blog posts were all posted on our Technology in Your Ministry blog, concordiatechnology.org/blog. We've got a lot of great content. We contract with church communicators and other people in the church. It's not just us. You'll see me posting regular on there, but we've got a lot of other people. And we're doing live videos with this on Facebook pretty much on a weekly basis. I think we've only missed 1 week this year, and that was due to illness. So like earlier today, Bill Johnson from the Fort Wayne Seminary talked with Rachel on our team about how to evaluate new technology in the church. We talked with Katie Munson, I guess that was that last week or 2 weeks ago, about Canva and what a great tool that is, and gave some examples. So yeah, we've got a lot of great stuff on there. Again, that's all free. And lastly, there's my contact information. I had some cards back there. I've got some more if we run out, but feel free to take one and reach out to me at any time, and now I'll be happy to take questions.
Forgive me, it's just a comment. If you're starting to step up to do this, one of the ways we found that actually set the people free who were starting to take this mantle on was you limited the number of hours they were allowed to work on it.
Because
otherwise, it just becomes all consuming.
that makes a lot of sense.
You give them the freedom of just, you only have this much time, no longer, just devote it to here. And it actually helps them focus on what they want to accomplish in that time.
That's great.
Makes it more efficient.
That's great advice. That probably can be used far outside of just this, too. That's good. Thank you for sharing that. Good. What other questions can I answer? Yes?
In the sessions in your course on social media, did you start with assuming the person who's looking at this has no knowledge of how these things work?
We don't start at ground zero. No, it's not how to set up a Facebook page. It's far more on the strategy side of things. So yeah, I wouldn't say ground zero, but we don't get too technical too quickly. So.
Is it like a webinar? Could you do it as
It's
you go? It's just
Yeah, it's a recorded video that's on there. We did them live, and I took questions during them, but the recordings are all available. And I'm considering offering this again at some point. It may be a modified version of it, but yeah, all of the resources are available so that you can dig right in. So yeah, like I said, it was last year's presentation on this here that motivated me to do that, because there was enough interest in it. So it was a good experience. Yeah.
One thing that wasn't included in your whole list was video content, like being on YouTube.
Sure.
Post. What's your thought on churches with video content?
Well, I'd say video is far more than just YouTube at this point. Yeah, video is another form of content, but it fits within this strategy. And so I think from a YouTube perspective, some people put YouTube as a social platform, and I really don't see it as that way. It fits much more in the media empire as a way of distributing it. I know that for most churches, regularly doing polished video is just beyond their capacity, because it requires unique skill sets and unique equipment and lots of time. Things like sharing your church services, your messages, I think that's a key thing to do, especially the sermons, to at the very minimum have those up on your website, but sharing them on social media is good. There's a lot of copyrights involved when you're doing your entire service, and that fits, I think in some ways it can fit outreach in that it gives your potential audience a view inside the church. I think from a more practical standpoint, for those who are shut in, for those who are hospitalized or sick, it gives them an opportunity to participate in worship. And so I put that much more in the worship realm than the communications realm. But yeah, I think it's an important part of any kind of effort at your church, and it's kind of all within the, you know, that fits right into that media empire, whether it's a blog post or a vlog. The vlogs are easier to do if you don't do a lot of editing. You just sit down, record it, and post it. Don, the guy I mentioned before, who's on Snapchat, on Instagram, a couple times a week, he's posting a 1 to 2 minute devotion on Instagram that he just sits, records, shares, not edited at all, and that works out really well for him. He's not doing them live. He's just doing a quick recording to make sure he's satisfied with it, and then he posts it up. And he's done it in a variety of unique places too. And then others will do like pastor in his office, giving a weekly devotion or a recap of the sermon. Those are great ways of doing that. And I think it depends on where on that framework you want it to be. If you want it to be more of a conversation, I do a live video on Facebook and set it at the same time and ask people to share their questions on there. If you want to do it a longer format, that goes into that Media Empire one. The conversion one, it doesn't really work so much down there on your home base, although certainly video plays a role in introducing your church. That probably is a bit more polished and it's not as frequent. And so yeah, I'm definitely for video. You're right, I did fail to mention that as a key thing. In my mind, it's just a type of content used within all of those. So good, thank you for that question.
Does anybody else in the room have a church app?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay, we have used a church app, and it's just it's kind
That's-
of like a mini website.
It is, absolutely.
The person actually goes to the website, but
Good.
it can also be used for giving.
Yeah.
If they want to right away, they can just,
Who do you use for that?
e-church.
eChurch, okay.
And we have pastor sermons on there, and there's a lot of things, and videos and stuff, so it's
Good.
a useful tool.
We've had a... Say again? Why do you need both? Well,
People are carrying their phones around.
Well, if your
yep.
website's optimized.
If your website's optimized, but yeah, it's faster. It depends on how much login functionality you want. If you want, the value of an app versus a mobile site for anything would be the quick login and the notifications. Yeah, notifications that pop up on your phone. So, I've found in many of our conversations with our church management software, people want an app because that makes more sense than going to a website and typing it in or clicking on a bookmark. It's just far more convenient. So,
People first search you, they won't find the app, right? They'll first find your website.
right.
Right, it'd be more
It's right. It's much more for members. Yeah, and I think even though an app is not a big commitment, to install something on my phone requires me to at least know I'm going to get value out of it. And for somebody who's not a member of the church, that might be asking a little bit too much. But for members, absolutely, communicating that, it's key. Good. Other questions that I can answer? Well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.